parenting today is so much more difficult than it ever was. The time demands are more. The information demands are more. The money demands are more. All of that. So, and people are more spread out and not live in your nuclear families. So connections with kids are not as tight. And what I want to do with this book and with my consulting with parents and my workshops or speaking like this is to say to parents, let me help you get more connected to your children in a lot of different little ways. It's the small moments that make the difference.
Welcome to Real Talk with the Parenting Blueprint Coaches, where we discuss all aspects of parenting using the foundation of understanding personality dynamics to raise independent, responsible, and resilient children. My name is Karen Wagner, founder of Teaching Our Youth and the Parenting Blueprint. Let's dig right in with today's topic and have some real talk with the Parenting Blueprint Coaches. As we head into the Christmas season, I'm going to ask you a question. When your child looks back on their childhood, what is it that they'll remember most? Is it the gifts? Is it the busy schedule? Or is it the conversations, the laughter, and the values you've lived and shared with them every day? Today's episode is one of those conversations that feels like sitting down with a warm cup of coffee and remembering what really matters. I'm joined by Rosemary Olender. She's a writer, educational consultant, and an educator whose book, Coffee and Wisdom, A Father's Legacy to Leading a Rich Life, is built on life lessons that her father shared with her over countless cups of coffee. And so together today, we're going to talk about legacy. Not in dollars or in possessions, but in values, love, honesty, patience, and gratitude. So if you are a parent, educator, or mentor who wants to leave behind something that's deeper than things, this conversation is for you today. Rosemary, welcome to Real Talk. I'm so happy to have you here with us today. I know we met last week and talked a little bit more about your book and the things that you were instilling through your book. And I just felt that it was just a wonderful opportunity to be able to share this with our listeners, and especially Christmas week. As a mom and stepmom myself, we just had a Michigan Christmas. We were down in Georgia last Christmas, and it was doing all the things, right? We have all the gifts and the shopping and the cooking and all the things that we're doing. But what I really treasured the most, and this is what leads us into what we're doing today, is the conversations and connections that we were able to make with our kids and grandkids while we were gone. So tell us a little bit about how Coffee and Wisdom was born. Why coffee? Why these stories? And what was it about your father's approach that made these lessons so powerful to stay with you?
That's an all-encompassing question. It's a good one. Okay. The book came about as the result of the very last conversation I had with my father the night before he passed away. I was sitting in the hospital with him after several weeks, and he knew he was probably not going to see me the next day. He had this intuition, and he said to me, before you go home, I need to tell you something. I need to apologize to you for leaving you with nothing. And it took my breath away, and I thought, what are you talking about? Do you not understand that I feel like one of the richest people in the world? And Tony, my sister, feels the same way. And he said, yeah, but I'm leaving you with nothing in the bank, very little marketable value on our house. We have a used car. I said, Dad, those things are things. They're not important. You have given us so many gifts throughout our life that made us feel that we won the lottery the day we were born to you. And he could barely speak at that point. And he said, I don't understand. And I said, well, then just listen and let me talk. So for the next probably 30 minutes or so, I reiterated for him a list of the gifts he gave us throughout our lives. And they were the gifts of time and the gifts of humor and the gifts of patience and empathy and gratitude and all of those kinds of things that taught us through his modeling and his behaviors what are the important things in life? What are the things that connect us as humans and as individuals and make us feel so successful? And I realized that from when I was little, I was very assertive and self-confident and resilient. And I started to think, why? How did that come about? Now, that conversation happened 40 years ago. He died in 1991. And then I was busy working and consulting and doing all of that. But I was jotting down ideas and writing down things about it. I wanted to pay tribute to him. When I lost my dad, I lost my rudder. He truly was my best friend. And my husband and I have been married for 56 years. But my father was my best friend. And he was gone. And I thought, okay, let me do a tribute to him. So I wrote this book. And then what happened was I jotted everything down, and then COVID came along and I was stuck and I was in the house. And I said, okay, let's write the book now and get it out there, maybe for his birthday, which would have been in March, the second year of COVID in March. And so I designed the book, and the cover of the book kind of says it all. You asked why coffee and wisdom. My father, from when I was a toddler, probably 4 and 5 as far back as I can remember, he would come to me after I got my pajamas on, and he'd say, come in the kitchen, you can have a glass of milk, I'll have some coffee, and we'll just talk for a little while. That ritual happened almost every day for the rest of my life, including the night I had the conversation with my dad. Because before he said that, he said, go get a cup of coffee and come and sit down so we can talk. So that's where it came from. And our tons of conversations over the years. About 12, I started to say, I want coffee. So I started drinking coffee. So coffee is very important to me. But what I realized was his conversations were not just, how was school today? And I'd say good, and he'd go on to something else. I would say, it was good. And he'd say, why? Why was it good? What made it good? What happened? Or did anything happen that upset you? And he would delve deep into the questions and really look at me, make eye contact with me and say, okay, how did you feel about that? So there was a lot of critical thinking that he demanded from me all the time. And and then he would do the same with me. He would say, well, let me tell you what happened to me today. And he'd tell me something about it. And he'd say, how does that make you feel? How would you have felt if you were in that? So he made me sort of analyze and take apart situations. My father was great with adverse conditions. He had a wonderful sense of humor, and he would always try to find the light spot in the most horrific situations sometimes and get people to laugh. So that's where the coffee and wisdom came from. And that, like I said, years and years, even when he was very ill, and he couldn't talk long, he would call me at night, because now I was married and not living at home. And he would say, got your coffee? Let's talk. And we would chat a little bit. And it was always until there's a piece in the book at the end that was a essay I wrote for a writing course just before he died. And I wrote it, and it was called Conversations Over Coffee. And it was about how we would do this every night. And the refrain would always be my mother coming in and saying, hey, you two, she's got to go to school. You got to go to bed. Enough now. Because sometimes we would be there an hour, 2 hours. As I got older, sometimes it was longer. So he gave us these gifts. The design of the book is such that each chapter, there's 12 chapters, there's 12 gifts that I feel are really important, that made me who I am, made me successful, and able to handle a lot of the negativity that comes around. I've lived through some pretty negative situations in my life, and it's like, how did I get through that? Well, my dad would always say, well, you can make a mistake, You can have somebody come at you in a way that you don't like, but before you react, think about it and think about what could happen. A mistake is only a mistake if you don't learn from it. It's only a mistake if you don't do better the next time or realize, that's probably not something I should do. So he would walk us through the situation carefully. I can tell one story that sort of is the epitome in the family about my father's sense of humor. There was a time when my uncle bought a brand new car, and he cherished this car and he washed it all the time. And then along came a drought in our city, and the mayor asked that people not water their lawns and not wash their cars for a while. And my uncle was very upset, and my dad was talking to him, and my father said, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we take the car and go down by the river? Because we had a river that went through our town, and we'll use buckets and we'll clean it. Okay, so they did that. Well, when they got there, my uncle decided to back the car closer to the water. Well, he forgot to put the emergency brake on, and the back of the car ended up in the water. And my uncle tells this story, and my uncle was so upset that he was like, and my father just burst out laughing. My father is on the ground laughing to the point where he got my uncle laughing. And then he's like, what are we laughing about? My father said, well, what are you going to do? It didn't go all the way in. It's not floating away. We have the availability of a tow truck. We'll pull it out and we'll wash it. It'll be fine. That's the kind of thing he did. And throughout school, when I would say, this teacher was really mean, we would talk about that. One of the gifts he gave me was the gift of perspective and empathy. And he said, one time I was very upset with a teacher who came into the room, and when he came into the room, he kicked the wastebasket across the room. He was obviously very angry about something. And we just all sat there. We were in high school, and we just kind of sat there going, what now? And so my father said, did he ever explain it? I said, no. Did he apologize for it? And I said, yeah, he did say, I'm sorry. And then he started class. And my father said, well, how'd you feel about that? And I said, I just think he's a jerk. I don't like him. And my father said, well, let's take a step back. What if all of us, he said, people say, walk in that person's shoes. And sometimes we think we can, but we don't know. So what if we all had a banner that goes across our forehead that alerts people to what had just happened or what is causing us to behave the way we're behaving? You might feel differently. And I said, I don't think so. He shouldn't have done that. And he said, well, what if his banner said, I found out I have cancer this morning? Would you still feel that way? And I said, no. He said, what if the banner said, my dog died this morning? You don't know what people are walking around with and what they're dealing with. So take a step back and try to have some empathy. And I said to him, what do you mean by empathy? And he said, well, there's a difference between sympathy and empathy. You can have sympathy for somebody that has gone through a hard time, and maybe you've gone through it too. He said, and people can do that. He said, but empathy means it's here in your heart. You feel it almost as badly as they do. He said, and I know you have it. And I said, how do you know that? And he said, because when we're watching a television show and something sad happens, you cry. You don't just sit there watching it. I see tears. Or you laugh at the appropriate times. That says to me, you're getting it. You're getting it in your heart. So those are the kinds of conversations we had. So the book is designed so that each chapter is one gift. And then there's a short paragraph or two that explains why that gift is important to the positive growth of a child, why that's critical for them. We all know that love is, everybody has unconditional love. We would hope everybody would have unconditional love. But acceptance is a different thing. Acceptance is a parent who doesn't compare two kids, doesn't say, why can't you be like your brother? Because that says, I don't accept you the way you are. So there's a chapter on love and acceptance, and there's that little paragraph that explains why that's so critical. And then there are some reflections, like the story I just told you, on how he demonstrated or modeled or showed that gift, if I want to call it that. Then there's a group of suggestions for parents, some possible strategies or some ideas, many of which they may have already used, but some they may say, oh, that's a good idea. That would work for me, or whatever. So that's how the book is designed, with a chapter, with a suffix at the end that is a journal for the parent to use to say, okay, chapter 1, how do I give time? Parenting today is so much more difficult than it ever was. The time demands are more. The information demands are more. The money demands are more. All of that. So, and people are more spread out and not live in your nuclear family. So connections with kids are not as tight. And what I want to do with this book and with my consulting with parents and my workshops or speaking like this is to say to parents, let me help you get more connected to your children in a lot of different little ways. It's the small moments that make the difference. And my dad had a way of taking ordinary moments and making them really extraordinary. And that's where I'm at with this book and what I'm trying to do going forward.
What a blessing and a gift, just like you said, and he didn't even see it, what he
No,
had been gifting you, because that's just who he was at the core of his being. And as you're talking about your dad and even talking about your responses, I start to see even some of his strengths of his personality. Number one, to take that time where nothing else mattered but you, Rosemary.
right,
Just you and I having a cup of
right,
coffee, and let's just talk about things.
right,
Not about school, not about work, not about how you're pulling up your grades, which leads me into one of the next things I wanted to talk about, because so many parents, and I'm going to say I got into this trap too, focused more on the achievements and goals for my kids
yeah,
rather than connecting with their heart as to what they're thinking and feeling and guiding and coaching them, which is something that I learned as I started doing more with the parenting blueprint, is to really connect with the heart of the child. See, my personality is very driven, and so I'm setting my goals, and I'm setting their goals for them. They didn't talk to them about their goals. I'm just setting their goals for them and setting them up for their goals. But I wasn't taking that time to sit and listen to
right,
what they're saying. So the values that we teach and giving that time and sharing those little lessons and modeling is something else that you said earlier, that he modeled all these things, not just telling you or
right,
communicating these things. He was walking the walk. And so the values I should say that they do matter more than just the achievements. And so many parents, and as I said, I got caught up in that trap too, were really pushing towards those achievements while I was missing the opportunity for what you're sharing today. And so, as we're going through this, because you talk about your dad's style and having coffee and having those conversations, so how can parents and educators and even mentors teach these life lessons without having to make this, let's say, a formal lecture or a big deal? Your dad made a routine, if I can say that, right? Of just, this is
right,
what we do before bed. And I know a lot of
right.
parents do that with their kids. I'm watching my kids do it with their kids, their bedtime routines.
Sure,
We take the bath,
sure,
we read the
sure.
stories, we have some snuggle time, and then they go to bed. And so, and that was your time, and that was precious time. I found that personally, my kids like to talk to me before bed. Sometimes I thought it was to stay up later. When in reality, that was their time at the end of the day to kind of think, and things were calmer.
Right.
But do you have some suggestions on how parents can kind of build that in without making it a big deal? Like just what your dad
Yes.
did. It was a simple
Yes.
thing,
Yeah,
but how
because
can they do that?
my father would do that with me. That was our special time. That was the routine.
Yeah.
But we would do that. He would do that with me if we watched a television show. If television was on and we were watching a show, he would love to be alive today where you can actually stop it and talk, because we couldn't do that. But he would say, remember this scene. I want to ask you a question later. Because he would say, when that little boy did what he did to his sister, what did you think about that? How did you feel about that? So my father was sort of a teacher inherently. He didn't graduate high school. He walked out of school in 10th grade, went down to the Navy recruiter office, lied to them about his age to go fight in a war that killed his brother. And it's just inherently who he was. And my sister is 13 years younger than me. I started college the day she started kindergarten. Yet my father did all of these things with her too. So he was who he was. And he was a very humble man, and he didn't even know how wonderful he was. I'm blessed that he gave me the opportunity to let him know. And I could tell by the way he just kind of relaxed into it. And he was thinking about it, that it was a gift that I could give him back, But I think parents take the little moments. You walk your kid to the bus and you say, you're rushing, you got to go to work, and you're walking the kid to the bus and you say, do me a favor. When we get home tonight, I want you to tell me about 3 things that happened in school today and how they made you feel. And I'll tell you about what happened at work with me, and we'll talk about it. That's all. So that you're with them during the day. Your presence is there. When you mentioned listening, active listening is what is important. If I could get rid of one thing, it would be cell phones. It makes me crazy when I see people on cell phones, even when they're supposed to be conversing, and parents on cell phones. One time I was consulting, and I was all by myself for about a week in a hotel, and I went out to grab something to eat, and I was in a restaurant, and a mom came into the restaurant. It was probably a Wendy's, something like that. And she had 2 toddlers with her, and she had her cell phone. And this was after cell phones were around for a little while, probably 2008 or 9. And her toddlers were probably 4 and 8. I'd say 4 and 8, little girl, little boy. And she's talking on the phone as they're coming in the door, almost hit one of her kids with the door because she wasn't paying attention. And I noticed that first. And I'm watching because I'm all by myself. And I like to people watch anyway. And she comes in and she sits down, and never says a word to her kids, nothing. The waitress comes over and she quickly orders, and the waitress leaves, and she keeps talking. And the waitress brought over crayons and a page for them to color, and they were doing that. And her little girl is like, Mommy, look at this. And she's like, later. Now that's something my father never did. He might have said, give me a minute, but he was an active listener.
Right.
And so she wasn't paying attention. And I watched this for about 15 minutes. I thought I was going to crawl out of my skin. So I got up and I went over to the table and I said, excuse me. And she looked up and I said, I'm all by myself and I'm a teacher. And I know you're on a busy phone call. I'd be happy to sit with your kids and chat with them while you're talking. And she just went, no, I'm all done. And I said, okay, but if you need me, I'm right over there. Just signal to me and I'll come over. Well, she never did. And she put the phone down. But, just recently, my husband and I were out to dinner and we watched a whole family sitting at a table. Very not inexpensive restaurant. 3 kids, mom and dad. Everybody was on their own devices. Nobody talked the entire time they ate. It made me crazy. So yeah. I think if I could say to parents anything, you must be an active listener from when they are little, and you have to be an active observer of everything. Because if you don't listen to your kids when they're little, when they're teens and they're in trouble, they're not going to come to you.
I know it.
So you really need to do that. One of the chapters in the book is about rituals and routines and traditions. And with Christmas coming, we have a lot of traditions, I hope every family would have their special traditions. We have 2 that one of the things we do all the time is after Thanksgiving, the day after Thanksgiving, my grandchildren come over, they spend the night, we put the tree up, we decorate the tree, decorate the house, we make cookies, we watch a movie, maybe play a board game before they go to bed. Well, my youngest grandchildren right now are 18 and 14. So this year I said, I texted them and I said, hey guys, are we doing our Thanksgiving, day after Thanksgiving routine? Or I know you're busy, you got friends, you might want to be doing stuff. What do you want to do? Within 5 minutes, I got answers from both of them separately from different places saying, oh no, we're doing it. It was so grounded that was key. The way my dad taught us that was that Christmas Eve we're Italian, so we have a tradition called the Seven Fishes Dinner. I don't know if you're
Yes, I am
familiar
Italian
with that.
too, so yes.
Okay, so you got it. So we do the Seven Fishes Dinner. And my father was a real believer in us going out into the world and meeting people and doing what we could do. But he said, you can live anywhere you want in the world, but Christmas Eve, you're in this house. And just make sure you are here. And I remember saying to him when I was younger, well, Dad, it's just one night. And he said, no, he said, you're right. It is one night. It is the night when our entire family gets together and sees each other. Regardless of where they live, they come in and we have this night. The reality is, a year from now, one or more of us may no longer be here to come to this dinner. You don't want to miss the last opportunity you may have with someone. That's why you're here. So to this day, for 30 years after my father passed away, I still do it. In fact, I'm doing it 2 nights from now, because now I have to do it because everybody's gotten older and the kids are in all these things. I said, no, we're doing it. We can't do it Christmas Eve, but we'll do it. So we're doing it 2 nights from now.
Yeah, so, one of the things that my papa taught me, because as my kids got older and they have their families and they went their Christmas Eve and Christmas morning, so it's not all coming to my house anymore. And it was hard for me because, see, that was my tradition. That's what I looked forward to. But knowing that when they got married, they're starting their family. And like you said, I've got kids in Michigan. I've got them in Georgia. I'm in Indiana. We're not around the corner to be able to do that.
Right.
We just have to make it another day. My dad said, it's whatever day you make it. You still want to do the things that you do, but don't be so disappointed when it does not happen on the day. It's whatever day you make it. You make that magic for that day. And so last weekend when we celebrated Christmas here with all the Michigan families who actually came to Indiana this year, it was still magical. It was still that feeling. It was just a different day. And then this weekend I was down in Georgia and we did the same thing, with the kids down in Georgia. So it's whatever day we make it, but it is the traditions and the consistency that they will remember that we came every year, that they came every year.
Right. And what it does is it serves a couple of purposes. It serves to ground kids and give them some security. And it also lets them know that they're part of something bigger than themselves. It helps them to not be self-centered. It helps them to be grounded and secure in their world. When you look at children who have a lot of behavior problems, usually it stems from one of 2 things. Usually either they are insecure and they're not sure of anything. They don't feel like they have power over anything. These are the kids who, when they go home, they don't know if there'll be food on the table because they don't know if mom's there or not there, or if they have to fix it themselves, or they don't know if their parents are divorced, whose house am I going to? I had one child who was so disruptive because the judge agreed to let the parents split custody day by day. So one day he was with one parent, the next day he was with another. He never knew where he was going. So that insecurity. So the traditions and all of that gives you some security. Listening to your kids gives them security, appreciating them and letting them know that. The other issue is attention. I went to a wonderful workshop with a psychologist who was saying that All of us have attention tanks, very much like gas tanks on a vehicle on the road. Some of us have Volkswagen size attention tanks, and some of us have Mack truck size attention tanks. And these kids are all in your classroom and they're in your house, and your two kids may be very different, but you have to feed those tanks so that they can operate and run. If you don't feed them with positive attention, they'll disrupt because it gets them negative. They don't care if it's leaded or unleaded. What do they care? And I thought about that and I thought, okay, that's kind of key. And that was something my father gave attention to, even to my friends. When my friends would come over, he would sit with them. He visited me in college once a month. And he would drive out to see me and say, let's go to lunch. Half of the time we never got to lunch because we'd be talking with 2, 3, 4, 5 of my friends, and he'd be conversing with them the way he conversed with me. Who's your favorite teacher? Why are you studying what you're studying? Why do you want to be that? All of that. So attention and security are key.
Yeah.
They're real important.
Yeah. I can so relate to what you're talking about with the attention span, just what we do with the parenting blueprint model, because some of our active and outgoing kids, the attention span's a little shorter because their brains are thinking of the next thing. It's the next shiny object. It's the next thing that distracts them. But then our more reserved kids, they really take it in. They're slower in their thinking and their processing, and they connect with that. And it's not right or wrong. It's different. But I also know that there are some kids that I know that I have to stay within that window or I'm going to lose them and they were not going to want to sit with me again. And others that we could sit down and just go on for hours. And that really feels good to them too. So it's not right or wrong. It's different. It's really just learning what your child really needs. What's the best way to connect with them? But you talk about honesty and humor and patience and gratitude and some of the things that are discussed in your book. So share with our listeners, what is the role that all of those values really play when it comes to raising confident kids? We say these words all the time. We want them to be honest and patient. We want them to have all these things. But number one, we need to be modeling that. We can't just be telling them that they need to do it. We need to be walking that walk. But for our families who are listening, because this is long-term, this is legacy stuff we're talking about. It's not just raising our kids. It's raising our kids to a point where they are independent, confident, resilient young adults, because we have already laid those foundations. So you talk about those values. So how important is that in raising those confident kids?
I think it's essential. And it's essential as early on as your kid is talking and you can talk to them. A lot of people feel, well, when they get to middle school, it's too late. From when they're little. I can remember being in second grade and not arguing, but having an interesting discussion with my teacher about another girl in the class that needed to be treated differently. And I remember saying to her, I don't mind when you yell and you raise your voice to me, but have you noticed how she sort of cringes in her seat? And the teacher just looked at me. Where did I get that assertiveness? From my father. It was a situation I saw. I had empathy for that child, even as a 6 or 7-year-old. And so I think it's essential. What parents need to understand is that parenting is a journey. It's not a destination. And like any journey, it has its ups and its downs, its positives, its negatives, its roadblocks, it's, all of that. And there's no perfection to it. But if it's about connection, it's about making strong connections with the kids. All of these gifts, as you said, and as I've said in the book, it's about modeling them. If your child even overhears you on the phone, bullying somebody or being really rude to them, and that might happen. But as a parent, you can turn around and say, I should not have said that. That was not nice of me to do that. And recognize that you too have made mistakes. Because you know what? Your kids are going to learn as much or more from you than you will from them. you know?
Oh,
So, and they
yes.
will teach you things. They will say things to you. I remember one of the times we had this conversation, and I was talking about just kind of letting parents know when you make a mistake, or it takes over your mind and you can't think about other things. I had a teacher one time, her first grade students were, first graders are kind of rowdy and all of that. And her way of corralling them was to get them in the room, give them a piece of paper, have it on their desk ready. And she would say, draw a picture of whatever's going on at home that's in your head right now that it's hard to let go of and not think about. And they would do that. And she did the same thing. And then she'd show her picture and she said, here's my picture, and I happened to be there to watch this one day. And she said, my daughter's a track star and there's a big meet this weekend and she had a good chance of winning. But last night she sprained her ankle and she can't play. And I'm very upset about that. But you know what? My job today is to teach you not to be thinking about my daughter while I'm here. So I'm going to fold this paper. I'm going to put it away. And at the end of the day, we'll talk about it and we'll talk about all of your issues. And she would get them on track. Just taking little moments, ordinary moments, and making them extraordinary for kids and just letting them understand, again, it's relationships, connections.
And the small shifts that we can make to become intentional. And I think there are many times where we miss the opportunity because we're looking at the end goal, not the journey, as you said, right?
Right.
It is a journey and we're looking for the end goal. And I think that's something that changed for me as I matured, if I want to say, in my parenting. Because, one of the things I share all the time, and Rosemary, you can probably attest to this, is that no one teaches us how to raise a human. We don't.
No.
And even if they did, what works for one doesn't work for the other. And it's so important to understand how your child is wired, understand their internal emotional needs. So you are meeting those in advance before we get to, as you were saying, that disruptive behavior to get the attention, because that is the communication that my needs are not being met. We tend to want to address that disruptive behavior because it's annoying. We want it to stop. But there's a reason why that's happening. And if we just dismiss that and we still don't get to it, that's going to continue to happen. So it really is what I say. It's the peeling back of the onion. It's dialing things back to get really deeper as to why is that happening, or why was it the outburst? And, there are things that are going to be happening that you may get upset about, but can we have a conversation without the rude or disruptive things? But I needed to be the parent that was going to guide and lead them into being able to reveal what that is in a calm and empathetic way. And that was another word. I didn't know what empathy was. And it's not part of my DNA. I'm like the Nike switch mom, like just do it. I didn't care. I didn't want to hear it. I got places to go and things to do, and y'all got to line up and go with me. And so you can see I was messy in the beginning. I wasn't attuned to my kids' needs because I had an agenda. But once I realized that my agenda was driving my kids to become the way they were, which wasn't pleasant for anybody, for me, dealing with their behaviors, or for them feeling those needs were not being met, was when I realized that I needed to slow it down and be what you said earlier, perceptive of what was really happening so I could connect with that child. And so there are some small shifts that you talked about, being able to take a situation and create it as what we call a learning opportunity, and not just kind of brush it aside and get over it, but to take an opportunity to discuss that and go a little deeper. And it's those moments that I think will really connect with the child, for them to feel, when done correctly, that my mama gets me. My dad gets me. They get me.
Right.
And when they feel that way, when something else happens in their life, and it will, as they become young adults and start becoming parents themselves, that they feel safe to come back and talk to you because you get them. So I want to go into a closing question here, because during the holidays and everything is just going so fast, and we got place to go and things to do, and cooking and people and concerts and all the things. How can families slow down and focus a little more on that. Let's call it the connection over consumption. It's all about the gifts and getting the gifts and getting the perfect gifts. And then your kid gets the gifts, and then you realize that the gift is put aside and they move on to the next thing. And then we start feeling frustrated that I went and got this gift that you wanted and you don't even play with it or you don't even appreciate it. And then that becomes a whole nother thing going on inside of us. And then we react to a certain way. So how do we slow this down and focus more on that connection over this time and not just the consumption of the commercial things?
Yeah, well, easier said than done, certainly, because you have it. So much of it is individual and customized to the family.
Yeah.
But, for examples, if, people like to make cookies, well, you can make 6 different kinds, or you can make 2 different kinds,
Yeah.
which you can slow it down, and not just make the cookie, but talk about whose recipe is it?
Yes.
Is it a grandmother's? Is it your aunt's? Is it a friend's? And then tell the stories. Storytelling is so motivating for all of us. I mean, when I was a teacher, if I could tell a story that the kids could relate to, they would remember the factual data that I gave them. Absolutely. If I could relate, my husband was a chemistry teacher, and college level. And I can't tell you how many students would walk in and say, oh, I failed chemistry in high school. I could never pass it. He'd say, you'll pass it with me.
Right.
Because he taught chemistry from the point of view of, let's talk about cooking.
Right.
Let's talk about why baking soda does, or let's talk about makeup. And how putting this on this, so that he related it for the girls, he related it for the guys. If you put the wrong gas in an engine, so everything was relatable, and he would tell a story about it, and they would remember the story, and then they would tie the things. So I think if parents would just do less, activities. Don't try to fit 3,000 things in, and have the space, even maybe at the end, to say, is that something you want to continue to do? Did you enjoy doing that? Or should we just drop that out of the routine? But routines and rituals are important, but we got to see if the kids think they're important too after a while, because they really are. I mean, it is definitely, I used to go crazy over doing Christmas cards. And this year, because I'm doing a lot of speaking and stuff, I thought, I'm not going to do that. So what I did was I sent cards to the people, elders and people that were further away and were not computer savvy. I sent, I think I sent 12. And then I sent an email out and said, look, I am so crazy busy, but I want you to know you're important in my life. And I did that for people, and that was easy to do. So find a different way to do it, to find the time to give your kids, and then spend the time with your kids. You don't have to go to 12 stores. I think, Amazon has made a big difference, because I didn't have to be out running to all these stores.
Life too. Yes.
And, it just made it easier for me to do that day with my grandkids, for me to do Christmas Eve and 2 nights and that kind of thing. So I think cull out the unnecessary, keep the special, especially this time of year when anytime that it gets really hectic, and just slow down, talk slower, listen more carefully, and wait for your kids to respond. A lot of kids need extra time to respond, and you need to give them. In the book, there's also a whole list of my father's rules of thumb. We had rules of thumb in our house. One of them was, you never, ever call anyone stupid.
Right.
It's not a word I want to hear, because nobody's stupid. They might be misinformed. They might not, want to know that information, but, just things like that. I would say things like, don't compare your kids. Unless you want to say, you mentioned they're so focused on, okay, I want you to get an A on that test. I want you to do this and that. Yes, that's all very important. It was very important to my father too. And he used to joke when I'd say I got a 98. What happened to the other 2 points? And he would laugh. But he was more concerned with, Did you put effort into it?
Right.
Did you study the information? Did you understand the information that you studied? You didn't? What should you have done? What could you have done? Could you have gone to your teacher again so that wouldn't repeat itself going forward?
So, what do you hope your readers, people who read the book, and listeners for this specific episode will carry with them long after Christmas is over? And if there was one, let's dial this back a little bit. If there's one conversation that you hope families will start after reading this book, because there's a lot of really good golden nuggets, I call them, in your book, what would that be? So if there's one conversation that you hope families will start after reading your book, what would that be?
I think, well, that's a tough question because it's going to be so different family to family. But I think what I would like parents to understand is that they want to be building a legacy of character.
Yes, character.
Not a legacy of things. So I think what they want to find out, if they haven't already, they want to have conversations. It's a crazy time of year. Maybe after this is all, things say, okay, we're in a new year. We're in 2026 now. What could we do differently this year so that we can feel closer to each other? Maybe that's the conversation to start with, because it's all about connection. It's all about relationships. What could I do? What could I do better to let you know how important? One of the things that I saw a lot in my family, all of my aunts and uncles are gone now, and my father, but is that when my father greeted people, he greeted them with a huge smile that his mouth went to his eyes. It was big. It wasn't little. It was a big smile, like, I'm so glad you are here. And I think I would say that to parents, let your face light up when kids walk in a room. You don't have to say anything. That takes no time at all, but have the conversations about what would you like to do this year that we haven't done? Well, what would you like to do this year that we've done that you don't want to give up? What about this? Everybody complained about having to go to church if that's the family thing, is that something that you want to really get away with, not do anymore? Why? And then you get information. Any conversation that's going to yield information from their heart and their head is information you need to move forward. So you have to have those conversations.
Yeah, it is. And sometimes we just get so busy that we don't take the time. It's all about the presence of your presence over the presence that we're giving, just to kind of suffice of that. And I really think there's just a big difference, because when we get together with our family, and yes, we open the gifts, but we tell stories of the other Christmases or the things that we did. Or I was telling a story about going out the first year we cut down our first Christmas tree as a family, and Eric having to go to the bathroom and me telling him to go behind the tree, and he went behind the tree, but he had a poo-poo instead of a pee-pee, and I was stuck out in the woods with a kid who just pooped in the woods. I mean, they're just funny stories that we remember. And, and then it was like, then someone else had another story, and someone else had another story. And so that's the bonding stuff that when our kids get together, that we just laugh about those things growing up that you just don't have when you're just focused on checking the boxes and getting things done, right? And being able to do that. And so this is just so wonderful. And I think it's just a perfect time for parents to really connect with that. It's a busy end of year, going into the holiday season. And as you're saying, what do I want to do differently next year? How can I carve out that kind of time to make those connections? Because my kids will be home from school. We're going to have a break. Maybe you've got kids from college that are coming home and spending time with you. And not that you need to monopolize that whole time, but how can you make those special moments to break bread, get coffee, do something together, and just really get in touch with their hearts and who they are. So Rosemary, how can people get a hold of your book? Because I know there are a couple different ways that they can get this and get into that book, learn some of the lessons that your dad was teaching and didn't even know he was teaching, and how they can weave that into their life. But how can they get a hold of your book?
Okay, one more suggestion before that, because it's key. I would say in the conversation with your children after Christmas, set some ground rules for the phone and say, when we talk to each other, we're going to put our phones down. We're going to look each other in the eye.
Yep.
That will go a long, long way to people hearing better, understanding more. Okay. All right.
I call them screen-free zones. This is the screen-free zone. Everything goes.
Yes.
Let me tell you what's happened with me with my screen-free zone. So when I go spend time with the grandkids, Rosemary, even if it's in my pocket, they'll see it in my pocket and they'll try to get it out of my pocket. Like they're just attracted to it. So I will put it in my purse and put my person in another room. And if I need to go check my emails or any messages, I will, excuse myself and
Me
go
too.
because that's what it is. So to me, it's requesting this is going to be a screen-free zone or this is going to be a screen-free time, and everybody just puts it away. And for the most part, I think most of the kids, my kids being in their 30s now, they get it. I'm sure with the teenagers, it's kind of like you're cutting off their right arm for them to have to let go the phone and walk away with it. But just say, just for this period of time that we're just going to have a screen-free zone just so we can connect and be with you.
For this short period of time. Yeah. Speaking of that, our school district here in the city of Syracuse has banned cell phones in school. And I have two teens that are in high school. And I asked my granddaughter the other day, how's that going?
Yeah.
Are you upset about it? She said, no. She said, people are actually talking more.
But
and he said, really? Whoa, what a big thing,
That's what I've heard from schools that are starting to take that approach, and they were unsure of what the pushback would be.
Because my background is speech pathology, and one of the things that is happening with cell phones is kids are losing language skills because they're not learning how to converse. Yeah. And parents need to make eye contact. And I tell parents, if you've got a 4-year-old, get on the floor.
I do.
Look them in the eye and talk with them. Don't look down on them all the time. So all of that. So, okay. Anyway,
so how can I get a copy of your book? Because I think there's a lot of gold in here that can really benefit parents.
If they go to my
desiring that connection.
Okay. If they go to my website, which is just my name, rosemaryolender.com, they will see both books. I have another book that I wrote earlier, but this book has a CTA on it. So all they have to do is click on Ex Libris, which is my publisher, and they'll go right to their bookstore and they can order it in any format they want. They can get a hardcover, a softcover, or an ebook. And by going to Ex Libris, they will get it faster because if they can get it on Amazon, they can get it but if they go to Ex Libris, they're the printers. They will print it and send it faster than going through Amazon, because Amazon has to tell them about it, and it just takes a couple more days. So that would be good. And the only thing I would ask is that if anyone does buy the book and they read it, if you would just please do a review on Amazon, because other people won't find it if there aren't reviews. It's a silly system, but it's the way
that is
the logarithms, the algorithms work.
Yes.
So if they would just do a review, that would be great.
Yes. Rosemary, this was a wonderful conversation. And for those of you who are listening today, first of all, I want to thank you for joining us. It is so important that we make the time to connect with our kids. And I really mean that. When I say make the time, we find time to do the things that are most important. And depending on your personality and how you're wired, I'm very task driven. So I always have things to do because I have results that I need to accomplish. But I have learned that the window of time I have with my children is this short in the scope of my life. And if I don't invest that time and create that legacy that you talk about, Rosemary, the legacy of connecting with my kids, they will grow up and they will leave and they won't have a desire to come back because they didn't feel truly connected to me as their mother, father, the most important people in their life. And I see so many parents right now that are feeling the pains of that because we're driven by our careers and the things that we need to do. So parents, if I can say anything to you, it's pull back, slow down, look your kids in the eye, screen-free zones, make connections, make memories, do something special with your kids, like coffee before bed. I don't know if that coffee for bed would work for me. Bless your heart. But being able to make those moments and create those connections, which is the legacy that will last a lifetime. So I want to thank you for joining us for this episode of Real Talk. If you enjoyed this, like this, share it out, subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you on another episode of Real Talk with the Parenting Blueprint Coaches. Rosemary, thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. It's great.
Absolutely.
And happy holidays. Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to you too. Thank you.